Welcome to ScalaUA conference. It's great.
You're not too tired, so I'll talk about something that is rounding. So let's see, rounding is something that we need sometimes, and sometimes we get it without wanting it. So usually we don't worry about it, but I think it's interesting to look into this, and there's maybe some angles that we haven't observed before. So basically, we know two ways of rounding, yeah? So we say it's like this, we round 1.4 to 1 and 1.6 to 2, or we round both to 1, yeah? It's the truncating or the rounding, yeah? And we need this kind of story or this kind of rounding because either we have constraints that our processing doesn't allow the precision that we have, and so we have to reduce it somehow. And sometimes it's part of our business logic. For example, when we do banking application, then the business logic describes exactly where and how the rounding has to happen, and then we have to deal with it. But that's part of our world that we have to live with this. Now, let's look at this. I try to make it more general, that we think about a little bit more what it means. So what is this? This is an island in Germany, and there's islands like this that are not protected against flooding. So minor flooding, yes, but if there's a major flooding, which happens maybe sometimes in a year, they are just flooded like this, and the houses are built on little hills, and hopefully the flooding doesn't flood the hills, then everything is fine, yeah? And just think of this, you're like on this island at some spot, yeah? And then when the flooding comes, the allowed locations where you may be are smaller. Only the hills are allowed, yeah? They are called Warft in German. And so if we look at it more mathematically, then we say, okay, we have a set S of values, and then we have a subset T. That is what we allow after the rounding. And then we would think that this rounding is some kind of approximation. But what approximation means is, of course, a little bit arbitrary, but most of the time we know what it means. So what we also want is some kind of semi-homomorphism. Yeah? So when we do arithmetic before rounding and after rounding, that it's kind of giving similar results. Yeah? Ideal would be that it's equal, but that's unfortunately something that we don't usually get. But some kind of semi is nice to have, and we actually expect that, otherwise the rounding is usually something crappy. So if we think of this, as I said, there's locations that are okay. That's the S, that are okay when there's no flooding, and then the flooding happens, so we make a rounding process, and then we hurry to the warfts. So the T is the warfts, and S is the whole area. And then I can just tell you what we usually think of rounding. We can make very strange roundings. Yeah? And that is this percent for taking the remainder, and we could use the power of P, we could use something else even. And then we round by just taking the remainder. Yeah? It's a little bit counterintuitive, but why not? It actually fulfills this homomorphism thing very well, so it's kind of nice mathematically. And yeah, as I said, the math of it is really interesting, and it's maybe not the kind of math that's interesting for us as Scala guys, because it doesn't lead to monads. But anyway, if you like, you can look into it, and p-adic mathematics is very interesting for itself. But it's something that we also need to keep in mind, because we have something like integers, and not the integers that we should use, that are arbitrary length, the big ints, but these ugly integers that we inherited from Java, long and int and whatever, that have 64 and 32 bits. And they actually do this kind of thing that I now call rounding. Yeah? They cut off the most significant digits once you get too big. And usually we don't think of it. We think of business logic, but then suddenly, oh, ouch. Okay? So don't think it's totally unimportant. But if we call it rounding or not, I mean, that's up to you. But if we take the regular rounding, we have also some issues that we usually don't think of, but they are actually suddenly important. So what happens when we have negative numbers? For example, yeah? We can, if we round up or down or to nearest, what does it mean for negative? Yeah? And basically there's both ways are possible and both ways occur, and so you should decide which one you mean or figure out what your function does. And usually you try it out because at each programming language is different, or each time you use you have forgotten it or whatever. But there's towards zero, away from zero, towards infinity and towards negative infinity. That's the right thing to use. And when you use up and down and then these things, then you have to be careful what that really means. But if you know it, it's okay. And then there's another thing, that's, I said, with a boundary, yeah? Because there's this half thing. And of course, when you do the half, then you have this rule, okay, 1.5 is rounded to 2 usually, but that's something that we actually have to define. So when we already round to nearest, then we have to add an additional rule what we do with the half. Yeah, and there's again towards zero, away from zero, and these things, only for the half, the rest is going to nearest. But we can also do things that we round towards odd or even digits, and sometimes that's a good idea, because if we have a large number of numbers that we round, and then we kind of operate with them, maybe if we round to odd or even final digit, then the rounding up and down is distributed maybe evenly, and by that we, if we add them or something like that, the result is falsified a little bit less. It's not really solving the issue that we are inaccurate, but it's maybe helping a bit. So look into this when you do that. And then the other thing that we actually see here, what is this half? Yeah, this half is the arithmetic mean. And so we, for some arbitrary reason, we say, okay, that's the limit, and from there we go up, and from there we go down. But why do we take the arithmetic mean? I mean, it's just one possibility, but we could also use other means. So there's a geometric mean, so we take the two numbers, multiply them, take the square root, and take that as a boundary. Maybe that applies better to our business logic, so it's possible, yeah? And it has a funny behavior because the zero is special when we multiply with zero, so the boundary is zero. So 0.1 gets rounded to 1, whatever we do there. But why not? Harmonic, quadratic, cubic means, you name it. You can have more, but these are the most important ones. And then another issue that's also interesting to think of, what is in your money or in money that you know the smallest coin? So some have like a 0.1 or 0.01 or so, then the usual things that we have just apply out of the box. But there's weird countries like Switzerland, and the smallest coin there is like 5 of something, yeah? And not 1. Yeah, and there's maybe other countries where it's a 2 or so, yeah? And there we come to something that I want to call remainder rounding, yeah? So we want to round to multiples of 0.05, yeah? We can just say we round to multiples of 5 and then divide by 100, because like this dividing by 100 and multiplying by 100, at least for us humans, is very easy. For the computer it's hard because it's not a power of 2, but it doesn't matter. It's just the concept that we try to see. And I mean details I don't want to go into. It's a lightning talk, not a long story. So just think of this, and I say we can use this, but this you make wrong, so I think it's good to have a concept for this, and I just want to call it remainder rounding. And I just want to remind you, it's also remainder. We had this strange rounding in the beginning that had to do with remainders, but this is two totally different stories. Yeah, this is quite normal. It's just a little bit tweaking of what we normally do for rounding. And so just assume there is no decimal point in the rounded results. Yeah. And then we say we only allow a certain number of n digits. We can use this m, yeah? So you say m is any number, maybe it's a 10, maybe 100, but maybe it's a 7 or whatever. And then we take the remainder modulo this thing, so this percent operation. Don't worry about negative, that's not important in the moment. But then you say, okay, you only allow these values. And then pretty much it goes the same way as everything. So we can say we have 0 and 5 that we allow, but we can also say we allow 2, 5 and 7 or whatever you like. Usually it's like this, so, or I did it like this. And then, as I said, it works like regular rounding, but it can be interesting if you want to tweak this thing, you can exclude the 0. And then you get quite weird effects, because then you have the 0, which is normally the most legal word you can think of, but suddenly the 0 gets prohibited. And then you have to add rules for that. So, if you like, you can go that way. Now we have another interesting thing that actually has some application cases that you will probably encounter every year or so, at least, if you think about it, and that is rounding with a sum. So we have like S is a sum of some things, and we want to round the summons, yeah? And they should make sense. So the sum of the rounded values should be something that we expect it to be. Usually we mean that the sum should be the same, yeah? And this is more weird than we might think of, because, and more important actually. So we have one usage, and that's when you have a textbook and you read something like Ukraine consists, the area of Ukraine consists 20% of forest, 12% of rivers and lakes, and whatever. I made up the numbers, I didn't look it up, but just you know what I mean. You have this kind of thing you need to show to the managers, and they like to read this kind of reports. So actually it's occurring in our life that we deal with this, or our colleagues' life, whatever, and unfortunately managers get confused when this doesn't add up to 100, yeah? So we kind of have to find ways that we round these numbers in such a way that the sum is 100%, otherwise, yeah, you know what I mean. So, yeah, that's one thing. And the other thing is we have like parliaments and we have elections. Maybe 237 seats in the parliament, so they have possibility to, whatever is the constellation, to get a majority for the president or whatever they need. And then you have different parties, and you have n people who have put in a valid vote. The ones that invalid you just take out of the story. And now you have NA votes for party A and B for party B and whatever. And now you want to distribute the seats in some way that makes sense, yeah? And not party A gets everything, but really the way that it's done now, yeah? And so it's quite easy. We take 237 times NA divided by N. Yeah, and we round it. Now the problem is, if we apply any of the roundings that we have seen on the pages before, no matter what, you will always find cases where it doesn't add up to 237. Yeah? So that's the problem, and we have to deal with it. So it's something that doesn't really work satisfactorily. And what you will see is, for this, many countries have different rules. So there's this don't, and there's this and this, I forgot the names, but just think of it. I'm sure that the guys who sit in here from different countries have different rules how it's solved. And each rule is kind of just a compromise, because somehow you have to fill the parliament. Yeah? And just for the sake of thinking, think of each party gets exactly 1 million votes. And now you want to distribute it evenly, and you have 237 seats, doesn't divide by 5. So you have to cheat somehow. And it's a lot more, and you can tweak it this way, this way, this way, and you can find examples, and you say, oh no, what's this? But that's how it's working. So it's just this voting thing is difficult, and if you need to do something like that, I would recommend to investigate a little bit how to do it, how it can be done, and then do it, because the ad hoc approach that you come up in the first minute is probably not what you really want. Okay, I guess that's it. I have put links. I don't know if anybody can read them, but I have like all the aspects of this have been written in the past couple of years in my blog. So if you are interested in exploring any of these things a little bit deeper, you can find it there. Thank you very much.